Winter arrived in 1203. Crusader forces occupied stone fortifications across the Levant, featuring massive walls, defensible towers, and being impenetrable to siege weapons. By February 1204, chroniclers recorded an unexpected casualty list. Soldiers froze to death inside their castles. Not from battle, not from starvation, from cold. In the same winter, local populations living in wooden structures survived without incident. Stone had betrayed its occupants. The popular image of the medieval castle emphasizes military strength. Walls thick enough to stop trebuchet stones, arrow slits designed for defense, and moats preventing siege tower approach. These features made castles formidable against human enemies. But from roughly 1300 onward, as Europe entered the Little Ice Age, a different siege began. Temperatures dropped as much as 2 degrees Celsius below long-term averages. Regional extremes pushed winter lows to -30 Celsius. The Thames froze solid. Glaciers expanded. Storms grew wetter and more violent. The stone fortress, designed to repel armies, became a trap against the cold. The challenge wasn't simply to keep warm, it was to keep the stone warm. Millions of kilograms of rock actively drained heat from human bodies, conducted warmth outward toward freezing exteriors, absorbed moisture, and threatened structural collapse through freeze-thaw cycles. Medieval builders and inhabitants didn't merely endure these conditions. They engineered solutions that, in specific applications, exceeded modern efficiency standards. This is how they did it. A castle wall measures 3 meters thick. In summer, this mass provides defense and keeps interiors cool by slowly absorbing solar heat. In winter, the same mass becomes a battery, but an uncharged one. Stone has high thermal mass and low insulative value. It stores energy well, but resists heat flow poorly. When ambient temperatures drop to -10 Celsius, the wall cools to match. Every surface inside the Aonop castle, floors, ceilings, and inner walls reaches near freezing temperatures. To raise this stone back to 15 degrees Celsius requires heating millions of kilograms of material. Light a fire in this environment, and something counterintuitive happens. The air warms, but occupants feel cold. Radiant heat from human bodies travels outward and is absorbed by the surrounding stone. The sensation resembles standing near an open freezer. The material actively draws heat from the skin. Medieval accounts describe exactly this: roaring fires in great halls while inhabitants shivered, faces roasting while backs froze. The stone isn't just cold, it's wet. The Little Ice Age brought not only temperature drops, but also increased precipitation and stormier conditions. Stone is porous. Water seeps in from driving rain and rising damp. Saturated stone conducts heat faster than dry stone. The moisture creates pathways for thermal transfer. As temperatures swing across freezing, water trapped in, pores expands, cracks the masonry, and threatens structural integrity. Chroniclers noted water freezing in jugs placed indoors. Scribes complained in the manuscript margins about ink freezing in the wells. The dampness was total. Castle builders recognized this enemy early. Fortifications were sited on high ground, not only for military visibility, but for drainage. Exteriors were plastered and whitewashed to seal the stone against rain. Inside, the battle centered on moisture control, preventing condensation on cold stone faces that would accelerate heat loss and enable mold growth. But moisture control only delayed the core problem. The stone itself demanded a solution. The evolution of medieval heating systems spans 3 generations of trial and error and radical innovation. Early castles relied on the central hearth, a fire built on a stone or clay pad in the middle of the great hall. Smoke rose to the high open roof, escaping through louvers or gaps. This system provided 360 degrees of radiant warmth. People gathered around it, shared its heat equally. Efficiency hovered around 10 to 15%. Most of the heat escaped directly through the roof, along with the smoke. The room's upper volume remained permanently filled with choking gray air, forcing occupants to sit low. By the 12th century, the fireplace migrated to the wall. Chimneys were introduced. This architectural shift allowed vertical room stacking. Fireplaces could occupy the same wall space on multiple floors, fed by flues built into masonry. Multi-story keeps became viable. Private chambers on upper floors gained individual heating. From a thermodynamic standpoint, this represented a step backward. A chimney creates draft. Hot air rises up the flue, pulling fresh air in to replace it. In poorly sealed stone castles riddled with cracks around doors and windows, this draft became severe. Cold air rushed in through every gap while warm air was sucked out. Inhabitants experienced the frozen back syndrome, fronts roasting near the fire while backs shivered in the draft. The fire only radiated heat in a half circle, unlike the central hearth's whole sphere. The stone back wall of the fireplace absorbed heat and conducted it outward into the exterior walls, wasting energy. Medieval builders added smoke hoods and canopies to mitigate these losses. Hoods captured smoke while allowing the fire to sit further into the room, increasing radiant exposure. But the fundamental inefficiency remained. Western Europe largely persisted with this system, creating a thermal hierarchy within castles. Lords retreated to small, private heated chambers called solars, while servants and soldiers gathered around communal hearth fires in great halls. Northern and Eastern Europe took a different path. The Teutonic Order built Malbork Castle in Poland during the 13th and 14th centuries. The castle featured something exceptional, a heat storage hypocaust that decoupled the act of burning from the delivery of warmth. The system worked like this. A massive combustion chamber occupied the basement. Above it sat a carefully arranged pile of large granite stones, selected for thermal properties and durability. A fire was lit in the chamber. Hot exhaust gases passed through the stone pile, heating it to temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Celsius. During this phase, roughly 3.5 hours, vents to the living quarters above remained closed. Smoke escaped through a separate chimney. Occupants experienced no smoke, no flames, no fire risk in their rooms. Once the wood burned down to charcoal or was extinguished, workers closed the chimney damper and opened floor vents in the rooms above. Fresh air was drawn down over the superheated stones, heated instantly, and rose into living spaces through natural convection. In 1822, engineers tested the 400-year-old system to verify its function. They burned 7/10 of a cubic meter of spruce wood. Within 20 minutes of opening vents, the Great Hall, 850 square meters, rose from 6 Celsius to 22.5 Celsius. The air exiting the vents measured 200 degrees Celsius. The thermal inertia astonished them. On day 1, the temperature held steady. On day 2, air from the vents still measured 94 degrees Celsius. By day 3, the stones continued warming the hall. On day 6, air temperature from the stones registered 46 degrees Celsius, still contributing heat. One firing lasting 3.5 hours provided 6 days of warmth. The system achieved 80 to 90% efficiency compared to 10 to 15% for open fireplaces. It required no continuous labor, no constant stoking, no fuel waste. The granite mass acted as a thermal battery, storing energy and releasing it. Gradually, this technology wasn't Roman. The Roman hypocaust required continuous firing and relied on radiant floor heating. The medieval adaptation was a pulse and store system optimized for intermittent use and convective distribution. Northern Europeans hadn't copied Rome. They had surpassed it through different engineering logic, driven by the necessity of surviving the Little Ice Age on limited fuel reserves. Similar principles governed the Russian pech stove and the Germanic Kachelofen. These masonry heaters forced exhaust gases through labyrinthine internal channels before venting. The brick or stone mass absorbed heat, then radiated it slowly over 12 to 24 hours. The Russian pech often weighed several tons and occupied the center of a log dwelling. Its functions extended beyond heating. Baking ovens, sleeping platforms built directly on top, where families slept in a microclimate of 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. At the same time, the room air hovered near, freezing and even bathing. After the fire died down, one could crawl inside the firebox to steam bathe in residual heat. French philosopher Montaigne traveled through Germany in 1580 and noted with amazement that Germans sat in their shirts in winter depths because their tile stoves kept rooms so warm, while the French froze in castles with open fires. The divergence was complete. Western Europe burned constantly and inefficiently. Northern Europe stored heat and lived in comfort. Heating the air solved only part of the problem. The stone walls remained an enemy, a radiative heat sink that drained warmth from bodies even in a heated room. Medieval inhabitants couldn't change the stone. They could, however, line it. Tapestries covered castle walls not for decoration alone, but as functional insulation. A tapestry hung on hooks creates an air gap between fabric and stone. A pocket of dead air acts as a thermal barrier. This prevents warm room air from contacting cold stone and cooling through convection. The textile also physically blocks drafts seeping through mortar cracks. Research suggests tapestries reduced heat loss by up to 40% in stone chambers. Wealthier rooms received wood paneling, wainscoting lined walls from floor to waist height or higher. Wood has far lower thermal conductivity than stone. Inhabitants now radiated heat toward warm wood surfaces rather than freezing masonry. This room-within-a-room construction transformed the thermal experience without changing the structure. Floors presented similar challenges. Stone floors conducted heat directly from feet, a primary pathway for hypothermia. Thick layers of rushes, dried reeds, or straw covered floor surfaces, creating a thermal break. In wealthy chambers, furs and heavy wool rugs replaced rushes. This simple layer separated skin from stone and dramatically reduced conductive heat loss. The castle thus became a nested defense: outer shell of stone, middle layer of textile and wood, insulation, inner core of occupied space. Each layer compensated for weaknesses in the previous. Night posed the greatest danger. Fires banked down, body metabolism slowed during sleep, hypothermia risk spiked. Medieval sleeping architecture responded with a suite of adaptations designed to create thermal cocoons. The canopy bed featured heavy curtains surrounding the sleeping platform on all sides. Once drawn closed, these curtains trapped body heat, creating a microclimate significantly warmer than the surrounding room. Box beds took this further. Common in Northern Europe, these were wooden cupboards built into walls with sliding doors. A person climbed inside and closed the doors, sleeping in what amounted to a wooden box that retained all body heat. Claustrophobic by modern standards, they functioned as survival pods protecting against sub-zero drafts. Before entering bed, occupants performed a warming ritual. Brass or copper warming pans filled with hot embers from the hearth were slid between cold sheets, moved around to preheat the fabric, then removed. The initial shock of cold bedding, which draws heat rapidly from the body, was eliminated. Hot stones wrapped in cloth served similar functions. Placed at the feet where blood flow is poorest and cold most acutely felt, mattresses were stuffed with straw or wool. Wool offered a critical advantage. It absorbs moisture from the sleeper without feeling wet. This hygroscopic property prevented the clammy cold that accelerates hypothermia. Even when damp, wool maintains structural integrity and air pockets between fibers, continuing to insulate. This moisture management exceeded cotton or linen performance in cold, damp environments. Solitary sleep was a luxury or a curse of the wealthy. Servants and lower classes slept in groups to share body heat. This communal sleeping, sometimes called bundling, provided highly effective thermal protection. Dogs or other small animals often slept in beds or in the same room. In extreme cases, people slept above stables to utilize rising heat from livestock below. Heating the space and insulating the body addressed external defenses. But humans are furnaces that require fuel. Medieval winter survival relied on physiological strategy as much as architectural engineering. To maintain body temperature in freezing conditions, the metabolic rate increases. The body shivers, burns more calories to generate heat through thermogenesis. Medieval winter diets reflected this biological necessity. Caloric intake for active laborers in cold environments reached 4,000 to 5,000 kilocalories per day, roughly double summer requirements. The diet shifted dramatically. Summer emphasized grains, vegetables, and moderate meat. Winter emphasized fat. Tallow and lard weren't merely candle material. They were dietary staples, providing the dense energy needed for internal heat generation. Digestion itself produces heat. The winter menu favored heavy, slow-digesting foods, roasted fatty meats, thick breads, pottages enriched with animal fats. Fat provided 9 kilocalories per gram, compared to 4 for carbohydrates or protein. This density mattered when fuel availability was limited and cold was constant. Nutritional deficiency posed its own threat. The lack of fresh produce in winter created scurvy risk, a disease that weakens connective tissues and proves fatal if untreated. Root vegetables stored in cellars where stable temperatures prevented freezing provided some vitamin C. Sauerkraut and other fermented vegetables preserved additional nutrients. In cases of severe deficiency, folk medicine utilized conifer teas, pine needles, or arbor vitae, brewed into drinks rich in vitamin C. Historical accounts from Jacques Cartier's 16th century expedition confirm these tree-of-life decoctions cured severe scurvy during winter sieges. The body became the primary heater. External fires supplemented internal combustion. The skin formed the final barrier between internal warmth and external cold. Medieval clothing employed a sophisticated three-layer system optimized for moisture management and air trapping. The base layer worn against the skin was invariably linen. Linen, derived from flax, wicks moisture away from the body. This function proved critical for survival. Wet skin loses heat 25 times faster than dry skin. In an environment where manual labor caused sweating, followed by standing in freezing drafts, moisture management helped prevent hypothermia. Over the linen, multiple layers of wool provided insulation. Wool fibers have natural crimp and waviness that trap air in small pockets. Air is an excellent insulator when motionless. Even when wet, wool's scaly surface helps maintain structural integrity and retain some insulating capacity. Much medieval wool was fulled or felted, beaten in water to lock fibers together. This created a windproof, waterproof fabric that outperformed simple loose weaves. A fulled wool cloak could shed rain and block wind nearly as effectively as modern soft-shell materials. The outermost layer consisted of fur or leather. Fur was worn inside, facing the body, to trap air against the wool layers beneath. Hoods, an essential component, protected the neck and head, where heat loss is highly perceptible. The hood could be adjusted to shield the face from cutting wind. Testaments from the 15th century show that squirrel and marten were popular fur linings for the wealthy. Lamb was common among the lower classes. The entire system functioned through layering. Linen managed moisture, wool provided insulation, and fur formed a windbreak shell. Beyond heating and insulation, castle infrastructure faced catastrophic failures in extreme cold. The logistics of water and waste became daily battles. Melting ice or snow in quantity requires massive fuel expenditure. Deep wells inside keeps were prized because the depth kept water below the frost line. But the moment a bucket reached the surface, cisterns collecting rainwater risked freezing solid. Castles had to break ice daily or maintain small charcoal braziers near critical water points, a dangerous fuel expense that carried fire risk. Where pipes existed, rare luxuries in medieval castles, freezing caused bursting and system failure. Sanitation collapsed spectacularly. Garderobes, toilets built into castle walls, emptied down external chutes into moats or cesspits. In extreme cold, waste froze on chute walls. Gradually, a stalagmite of frozen excrement built upward, eventually blocking the chute entirely. Waste backed up into the castle, creating immediate health hazards. Clearing required manual labor. Servants, sometimes called gong farmers, physically chipped away frozen waste from chutes in sub-zero conditions. This revolting, perilous task was necessary to restore function. When chutes remained blocked, chamber pots saw increased use. Servants then had to manually carry waste through the castle to external disposal points, increasing disease transmission risk within confined winter quarters. Every system failed. Every system demanded constant human intervention. Warmth, like all commodities in medieval society, was distributed according to rank. The architecture of the castle reflected and reinforced this hierarchy. The lord and lady retreated to the solar, a small upper room with its own fireplace, lined with tapestries and wood paneling. They controlled fuel supplies, possessed furs and feather beds, enjoyed privacy and concentrated warmth. The solar represented privatized thermal comfort. Soldiers and servants occupied the great hall or guard rooms. Here, warmth was communal. They relied on a central hearth or shared wall fireplace, supplemented by body heat through group sleeping. No privacy, no guaranteed warmth. Survival depended on collective proximity. Monasteries presented a third model. For monks, cold became a spiritual discipline. The Cistercians strictly limited heating to one room, the calefactory, or warming room, where a fire was kept. Monks were permitted brief visits to thaw frozen ink or warm numbed hands, but sleeping quarters, chapels, and refectories remained unheated. Scribes documented their suffering in manuscript margins. "While I wrote, I froze," one noted. Another complained that their fingers were too stiff to hold the quill properly. The production of knowledge, copying texts, and illuminating manuscripts occurred in physical pain. Cold was not merely endured, but embraced as a test of faith, a mortification of flesh, a path toward spiritual purity. The same culture, the same climate, opposite philosophies. For castle nobility, warmth was power. For monks, cold was a virtue. Medieval people didn't simply survive winter, they gave it meaning. Folklore personified the season as a force, sometimes a demon, sometimes a divine test. The Icelandic giantess Grýla, the Alpine Krampus, the spectral wild hunt riding the winter winds. These figures represented the lethal, unforgiving nature of cold. They enforced social cohesion through fear. Naughty children or lazy workers were taken by winter demons. The folklore encouraged hard work and preparation, both essential for survival. The church framed winter differently, as a death of the year preceding Easter's resurrection. Snow became winter white grace, a covering for sin. Hardship carried theological weight. To endure cold without complaint demonstrated virtue. This psychological reframing made the unbearable bearable. By the time spring arrived, inhabitants had survived not through luck, but through interconnected systems of thermal engineering, heat storage and release, textile insulation, sleeping architecture, caloric loading, layered clothing, moisture management, infrastructure maintenance, and social organization. The stone castle, originally a military innovation, had been transformed into a thermal machine. The Little Ice Age lasted centuries. Europe's population didn't freeze to death in their beds. They adapted, they built, they endured. The Roman Empire had perfected hypocausts, but that knowledge was lost. When the climate turned brutal, medieval builders reinvented and exceeded Roman efficiency. They created systems that stored heat for days, required minimal labor, and achieved near-modern performance using only stone, fire, and intelligence. The tapestries, the box beds, the fulled wool cloaks, the sauerkraut in cellars, the warming pan rituals before sleep. None of these were accidents or superstitions. Each was a precise response to a specific thermal challenge. Together, they formed a comprehensive survival system that kept humans alive in stone fortresses at -30 Celsius. Across centuries and continents, one pattern repeats. Humans encounter environments that should kill them. They observe, experiment, fail, adapt, and eventually master the hostile conditions. The medieval castle in winter is a testament not to endurance alone, but to the specific, methodical application of engineering principles without electricity, without modern materials, without any resource except human ingenuity and the determination to survive. The stone walls that once trapped crusaders and condemned them to freeze eventually became the foundation of a thermal battery system that kept Teutonic Knights warm for a week from a single firing. The moisture that threatened to crack masonry was managed through siding, sealing, and interior climate control. The body's need for fuel was met through caloric strategy. The skin's vulnerability to cold was countered through layered textiles. Every problem received a solution. Every solution reveals the same truth. Humans are adaptation machines. Given time, observation, and necessity, they engineer their way out of impossibility. The thermal siege was total, but it was met, battled, and ultimately overcome. Not through brute force, but through intelligence embedded in architecture, textiles, diet, and social systems. The medieval castle in winter wasn't a place of misery. It was a machine for survival, refined over generations, that worked.